Welcome. This is Soothing Whispers ASMR. As always, if there are any sounds or words you would like to see me perform, please leave them below in the comments. I accidentally stole the scissors. I actually think they're quite hideous, but I can't lose them because of it, so I guess I'm going to have them forever. Today I thought we would try something new and that I could read a short story, The Third Elevator by Aimee Bender. She's a beautiful novelist who's probably most well known for her novel, The Particular Sadness of Lemon Cake. She normally writes within the realm of magical realism, which is distinguished from fantasy, in that in magical realism, most of the world is normal, and there's just one tiny little magical element in it. This particular book is a fantasy intended for adults. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the very soothing work of Aimee Bender. The Queen took a swan for her pet. The bird was white and large, with a body so puffed out and fluffy it looked just like a small cloud, only with wings, with a beak, and with bright beaded black eyes. Throw him up into the air, said the Queen, and who knows who we'd fool. But the swan had moods that were heavy. His disposition was not cloud-like at all. He took the world very seriously, and sometimes had a hard time because of that. He didn't even like to fly. He preferred swimming instead, and occasionally would take a dip in the moat, leaving bright white feathers in his trail like the opposite of footprints. To keep her pet company, the Queen spent much of her day with the swan, and they walked around the castle grounds together. The two were fine companions, and the Queen respected the swan's sad moods, but she did worry about her pet and wished she could find him a proper mate. She made an effort to introduce him to other sexy swans, but the Queen's swan always arched to the side and refused to interlock his neck with theirs. He was picky. He preferred, in general, to tour the moat. However, on his own time, while the Queen was in the castle hearing citizens complain to her crowned head, the swan liked to go visit with the bluebirds who were scattered throughout the royal hedge like huge, loud blueberries. The bluebirds were a lively bunch and, on occasion, came out to visit with the royal swan. Once, on a Wednesday, Bluebird Runt hopped out, tiny and cobalt. She jumped over to the swan and leapt onto his white, plush back. The swan started nervously, but the bluebird insisted that she would not get off the swan's back until they spent the day together. The two strolled around the gardens, discussing flight and seed and feather rot, and the bluebird was very funny and kept the swan laughing his deep, trumpeting laugh. It was a beautiful, rich sound, and one that wasn't often heard on the palace grounds. The birds even toured the moat together, the bluebird chattering the whole time. By the end of the day, they were deeply in love. So the swan, being highly educated as most royal pets are, went straight to his mistress, who was tired and sweaty after listening to complaint after complaint. and wrote a document with fancy ink on thick cream-colored paper declaring that he and the runt bluebird wished to be married. The Queen, while having her shoulders massaged, read the note and put down one daintily booted foot. "I don't think so," she said. "You are a royal bird and ought to marry something more." The bluebird, still nestled like a lapis lazuli necklace on the swan's puffy back, tilted her head. The Queen winced. "I mean, you ought to marry something else," she continued. The swan hung his long white neck, and the bluebird flew into the Queen's eye. She did not peck it out, but just placed the cold, hard cartilage triangle of her beak next to the liquid white of the Queen's tear duct. "Bless you both," said the Queen meekly. The swan said he would not leave his mistress, so the two birds stayed close by, setting up a home just outside the palace grounds, where the little bluebird made a nest large enough for the both of them. They were living contentedly in it, getting to know each other, and after a few weeks the runt bluebird laid an unusual egg. It was half the size of her body and speckled. The mollified Queen came over and praised its size and shape. The swan paced back and forth. "What will it look like?" he asked the Queen. "What if it's moody and depressed like I have been? What if it's a freak bird?" The Queen tried to comfort her pet, but the swan just paced more. All the citizens of the kingdom were curious, and the egg was the topic of many discussions and debates at the local tavern for weeks. The bluebird chatted and sat in the nest patiently, and the swan brought her seeds and twigs and stroked down her feathers. He told her his worries. She thought they were funny. When the egg finally opened, to the surprise of everyone, it revealed nothing but a cloud, pale blue in color, rising slowly in the air. The Queen's mouth dropped open. The bluebird trilled with laughter. The swan, with a proud and powerful ache in his breast, watched in awe as his child gained in altitude, higher and higher, until the cloud lifted up enough to float gently to the next country, the wind hovering beneath it like the sweetest of cradles. About 2 miles from the swan's nest was a glass-walled lobby unattached to any building. It stood smack in the center of the kingdom and had for as long as anyone could remember. Inside this lobby were 3 elevators. One was made of gold, one was made of wool, and the third was made entirely of feathers. The gold elevator would descend 10 stories down into the middle of the earth. There it opened its doors to a mine shaft where workers struck shovels into the walls and picked and pulled until nuggets of gold fell onto their feet. Then they put the gold into the gold elevator. The elevator closed its doors on its own accord when it reached its weight requirement, and a collection agency came and collected the goods once daily. No miners were allowed to get inside the elevator and ride on up to the fresher air of the lobby, the elucidation of sunlight. The elevator, made of wood, stayed on ground level and had a set of gnarled bark doors at both ends. One set opened to the lobby, and the other opened to the muted light of a forest, thick with trees and thickets, flickering with broken lemon-yellow rays. Here, the loggers who were making timber from the trees would take their stacks of chopped up trunks and place them in careful rows inside the wood elevator. The forest was quiet, the ground soft with moss, and the loggers would whistle tunes their mothers had sung to them long ago, when they were as small as the smallest sapling. Now their arms were solid, the muscles hard inside the skin. They loaded the wood elevator until it was heavy enough, and then its bark doors shut slowly, smelling of resin, and reopened on the other side to the lobby. The loggers returned to chopping and felling and whistling. The feather elevator went 45 stories high, up on its middle pole, the lightest elevator ever made. Birds eyed its slow ascent suspiciously, but assumed it was a large rectangular bird, for it smelled like them and even fluttered slightly. But where was the beak? At the 45th floor, the elevator opened its grayish doors and let the air inside. It could rotate around on its pole there, hoping to catch something in the upper stratosphere. Sometimes curious birds would dart inside its open mouth, sticking old twigs and more feathers inside it. Then the elevator would close up, descend to the lobby, open its doors, and reveal nothing more than a scrap. But once the elevator descended its 45th floor and arrived exactly on time with the other two, at the count of 3, from the gold spilled gold, from the wood tumbled fine logs, and when the feather elevator opened its doors, out drifted one pale blue cloud. On the other side of the kingdom, touring the moat as usual, the melancholy swan heard word of the caught cloud. He'd never even been to the famous elevators that held up the local economy, operated on their own schedules, and were visited once daily by the gold and timber collectors, but the following afternoon he waddled over. Unimpressed by the gold and the wood, he went directly to the elevator of feathers and stepped inside. He spoke in hushed tones to its walls, whispering to the old shed bones of his friends, persuading it to go high in hopes that he would see and catch his own. He felt nervous, rising inside the closed box, having never been in such a small space before. But when the elevator doors opened, he stood at the edge and trumpeted into the sky for hours, hoping against hope, putting his whole longing into his voice. Come see me, child, come see me. When just as the sun was starting a long descent, his pale blue offspring came floating by. The swan's heart leapt. Luckily, the wind on this day was just so, and the swan was able to get the cloud back inside the small rectangular elevator with him. The doors shut, and they rode down the 45 floors together. The swan asked his child polite questions, but the cloud was silent, just floating there in that room of feathers. When they hit ground level, the two did not exit. The swan wasn't entirely sure what to do, and what would be a fatherly act, but following his instinct, he held out his enormous wings and invited the cloud to gather underneath them. There the two huddled, pale puffy feathers against pale puffy atmosphere, until the cloud began to diffuse from the heat, and the swan ordered the elevator to begin its rise upstairs, which it did, because birds listen to birds, up and up and up. The doors opened to a sky fading to darker blue, and the swan kissed his child and wished it well, promising to return as soon as possible. The cloud floated away from beneath the wings of its father, drifting into the slowly turning black night. The swan decided not to ride the 45 floors down and took off out the doors the second before they shut. Wingspan as large as a tree trunk, tears in his snapping black bird eyes, the underside of his wing warm and empty. One of the loggers was a troublesome logger. He kept his axe very sharp and cut everything down except for trees. He felled telephone poles and even got through cement light posts. He chopped down fire hydrants and trellises, but he didn't want to cut down the trees because, he said, they were growing. Why would I do that? He told everyone else. The other loggers found him snobbish. Just cut the trees, they told him. Come on. But the troublesome logger couldn't. He said every time he put the blade of his axe against the bark of a new tree and prepared to slice in, he felt a clanging in his chest and knew if he cut it down he would have a heart attack at that exact same moment. The other loggers then found him melodramatic. Oh, go see the boss, they said. We don't need all these broken telephone poles, and besides, everyone in the kingdom is angry because they can't call each other up. The logger twitched when he heard that. He didn't like to unconnect people. He'd even tried to help the telephone electrical crew, but they just yelled at him to stop messing with the wires, and he felt so agitated by their yelling at him that he went and cut down a few more telephone poles about a mile away. The boss logger heard about the troublesome logger and called him into his office the next morning. Son, he said, I hear you are unable to cut down trees. You must not be a logger at heart. Your father was a fine logger, and his father before him was a fine logger. But if you are not a logger at heart, then we need to get you out of here. The troublesome logger hung his head. His father had been the finest logger ever known, winning speed awards yearly, filling the elevator so early they often took the day off and went hiking up the trails to look for mountain goats. In fact, when he, the best logger's son, had been old enough to become a logger himself, there was a party to initiate him because his genetic logging legacy was so superior to that of the average man. When he'd cut down his first tree, a small elm, they had popped open a bottle of champagne to mark the spot, cream-colored froth pouring over that stump. The young logger, 13 at the time, had to sit down because his heart was hurting so badly at the sight of the baby elm on its side, leaves dusting the ground, that he perched on the tiny stump wet with champagne while his father made constant toasts and got roaringly drunk. Since then, his father had died in his bed, with loggers surrounding him, holding his hands and looking at him with love. As he closed his eyes for the last time, they all leaned in like a group of trees, and the wind from the window rustled through their arms. His son sat outside on yet another stump, running his palms over the reins. The young logger looked at the boss and agreed that he was wrong for the job. He said he needed to leave, but didn't know where to go. Well, the boss said, there's always the mine. They're always looking for good men in the mine. So the logger left the forest of trees he loved and, holding his axe across his chest like a banner, emptied the gold elevator and took it 10 floors down. The miners were so used to each other They were very surprised to see a new face emerge from the elevator and find the new organization of features disturbing just because it was new. "I'm a former logger," said the logger. "I would like a job." "I'm a former logger," said the logger. "I would like a job here with you. I can dig for gold." The miners jeered at him. "But we don't like loggers," they said. "Please," pleaded the logger. The head miner shrugged and said they always could use extra help. He asked the logger a few questions about claustrophobia and then gave him a corner of the cave to work on and told him the best way to get along in the mine was to play poker after dinner and lose. The logger nodded, still clutching his axe. "You won't need that," said the mining boss. The logger clung to it and asked if he could keep it. "I am attached to my axe," he said. The miner handed over a shovel. "Very well," he said. "Just get to work." So the logger began picking apart the wall of the mine. The miners were singing songs, different from the songs the loggers sang. Miner songs were in minor key, intended to be less storytelling oriented and more repetitive. The logger listened and picked at the wall and hummed along when he thought he got the melody down, and then when he hit a chunk of gold in the wall, he knocked it out and threw it behind him in the pile, and then felt awful. It was the same feeling he'd had about the tree, a clutching in his chest, at the gold being ripped from the wall and going off into the world to wind up on the wrist of some person somewhere. He doubled over with pain. The miners kept singing. The logger took some deep breaths and then picked up his shovel and began digging at the wall again, with less vigor now, and soon he hit another nugget of gold. He held it, a chip the size of a tooth, and stuck it in his mouth. It fizzled on his tongue. Unable to throw it behind him, he replaced the nugget in the wall and spent some time shoring it back up. Then he picked out a piece of the black wall and threw that into the gold pile. He did that for hours, throwing nuggets of wall into the gold pile and hiding the nuggets of gold deeper into the wall. And when the boss came around to load up the gold elevator, his yell was heard echoing throughout the cavern for 5 minutes after he'd yelled it. "What in the goddamn, he bellowed. No one answered. The song stopped abruptly in the middle of the counterpoint third round about mountains. Several miners who were eating dinner put down their salami sandwiches nervously. There was not much yelling in the mine due to that echo. The boss toured the miners' faces, and when he arrived at the new miner, former logger, he looked at him, and the logger began trembling and stuttering. And the miner just pointed to the elevator. The logger picked up his axe and went back inside. He rode up with the pieces of gold, then walked straight through the wood elevator and returned to the forest where the trees leaned away from him in the wind. "There is no place for me," he thought. He was so agitated he couldn't sleep, so before bed he walked toward a cluster of houses and chopped down 2 light posts and the mailbox, and there curled himself there on the ground to rest, surrounded by a fan display of spilled letters. And with that is enough for today. Tune back in for more in the conclusion to the third elevator. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day and very sweet